heart of the wild Arizona frontier, a widow faces hunger, danger, and an uncertain future, until a stranger appears with a promise that could change everything. But what he brings with him may demand more than she's ready to give. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Arizona Territory, 1870. The scorching summer sun beat down on the small homestead nestled at the edge of a vast, unforgiving desert. Sarah Miller stood on the porch of her modest cabin, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Her husband Thomas had left 3 days ago to trade in the nearest settlement, promising to return with supplies before sundown. That was the last time she had seen him. Inside the cabin, her 6-year-old son James played with wooden toys his father had carved, while baby Emma's cries echoed through the thin walls. The infant was hungry, and Sarah's milk was dwindling, a consequence of her own diminishing strength. Their food stores were nearly depleted, and without Thomas, survival seemed increasingly uncertain. "Mama, when's Papa coming home?" James asked, his innocent eyes filled with concern beyond his years. Sarah forced a smile. "Soon, darling. Very soon." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Deep down, she feared the worst. Thomas might have fallen victim to bandits, hostile tribes, or the merciless desert itself. That evening, as Sarah prepared what little food remained for her son, a distant plume of dust caught her attention. Her heart leapt. Thomas? But as the rider approached, her hope crumbled. This was not her husband's familiar silhouette, but the tall, imposing figure of an Apache warrior. Sarah quickly ushered James inside and reached for Thomas's rifle. She positioned herself by the door, weapon trained on the approaching rider. The Apache warrior dismounted some distance from the cabin, raising his empty hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm to you or your children," he called out in surprisingly clear English. "What do you want?" Sarah demanded, her finger hovering near the trigger. "I bring news of your husband." The warrior's face remained stoic. "My name is Maka. I found him 2 days' ride from here." Sarah's grip on the rifle faltered. "Is he—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "He was attacked by coyotes, not the animal kind," Maka explained, referring to the notorious bandits who plagued the territory. "He was badly wounded when I found him. I did what I could, but his injuries were too severe." Maka's eyes met Sarah's. "His last words were of you and his children. He asked me to ensure you were safe." The rifle clattered to the porch floor as Sarah's knees gave way. A guttural sob escaped her throat, raw and primal. Inside, baby Emma wailed louder, as if sensing her mother's grief. Maka remained still, allowing her moment of mourning. When her sobs quieted, he spoke again. "The winter is coming. You have a young son and an infant. How will you survive alone?" Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears. "That's not your concern." "It became my concern when I made a promise to a dying man," Maka replied. "Your boy must become a man too quickly now, and your baby cries for milk that soon you may not have." As if to confirm his words, Emma's hungry cries intensified. Sarah glanced anxiously toward the door. "I can help you," Maka continued. "I know these lands. I can teach your son to hunt, to track. I can bring you food until you can provide for yourselves. Why would an Apache warrior help a white settler's widow?" Sarah's voice was laced with suspicion. Maka's expression softened slightly. "Because I, too, know what it is to lose everything. Because your husband saved my sister from miners 2 seasons ago when others of his kind would have looked away." He paused. "And because it is the right thing to do." In the distance, thunder rumbled as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The promise of rain, life-giving in this harsh land, seemed to underscore Maka's offer. Sarah stood slowly, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "We need food, medicine for the children if they get sick, protection." She met his gaze directly. "But this is still my home. My children are my responsibility." Maka nodded, understanding the terms of her conditional acceptance. "I will return tomorrow with meat and herbs. Your son can begin to learn then." As Maka mounted his horse and rode away, Sarah watched his figure grow smaller against the darkening sky. She had no way of knowing if she could trust this man, this stranger from a people her kind had been taught to fear. But as Emma's hungry cries echoed behind her, and the reality of her desperate situation settled upon her shoulders, she knew she had little choice. Inside, she held Emma to her breast, praying for enough milk to satisfy her daughter. James climbed into her lap, his small arms encircling her neck. "Who was that man, Mama?" he asked. Sarah stroked his hair, feeling the weight of their uncertain future. "Someone who might help us survive, my brave boy." She kissed his forehead. "And someone who says you must learn to become a man." James straightened his small shoulders. "Like Papa?" Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, my love, like Papa." As darkness enveloped the small cabin, Sarah rocked her children, her tears falling silently. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in their lives, one she had never imagined, with an ally she never expected. True to his word, Maka returned at dawn, his horse laden with fresh game and bundles of herbs. James watched wide-eyed from the porch as the Apache warrior efficiently dressed a young deer, explaining each step in his calm, measured voice. "The animal gives its life so that you may live," Maka told the boy. "We honor this gift by wasting nothing." His weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he separated meat, hide, and sinew. Sarah observed from a distance, her arms cradling Emma. A week had passed since she'd learned of Thomas's death, and though grief still clutched at her heart like a physical pain, necessity had forced her to function. The food Maka brought had already improved her milk supply, and Emma nursed contentedly. "Your son has good eyes," Maka commented as Sarah approached. "He watches carefully, learns quickly." "His father was the same way," Sarah replied, the words catching slightly in her throat. Maka nodded in understanding. "The first snows will come soon to the mountains. You should prepare. We have firewood stored, but not enough to last a harsh winter," Sarah admitted. "The boy and I will gather more," Maka said, "and I will show him how to set snares for rabbits. Small game will supplement what I bring." Sarah hesitated before asking, "Why are you alone? Don't you have a family, a tribe who needs you?" A shadow passed over Maka's features. "My people have been moved to the reservation at San Carlos. I refuse to go." His jaw tightened. "I will not be caged." "Then you're in danger," Sarah realized. "If the army finds you, the army has forgotten how to track anything that does not leave footprints on their roads," Maka said dismissively. "But yes, I must be careful." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Maka would appear every few days, sometimes bearing game, other times simply to continue James's education. The boy absorbed everything eagerly, tracking small animals, identifying edible plants, building snares. Sarah noticed her son standing taller, his childish softness giving way to purpose. One evening, as James practiced making cordage from yucca fibers under Maka's guidance, Sarah approached with cups of hot tea. "He speaks of you constantly when you're not here," she said quietly. "This morning he tried to braid his hair like yours." Something like a smile touched Maka's lips. "He is between worlds now, not yet a man, but learning manly things. It is good that he takes pride in these skills." "I worry about him," Sarah confessed. "He barely mentions his father anymore." Maka accepted the tea, his dark eyes thoughtful. Children adapt more quickly than adults. They must, to survive. But do not mistake his focus for forgetting. Later, after James had gone to bed, Sarah found herself sitting across the fire from Maka, an unexpected companionship forming in the comfortable silence. "You never told me how you learned English so well," she remarked. Maka stared into the flames. "I was taken to a mission school as a boy. The priests believed they could civilize me." His voice held no bitterness, only a matter-of-fact acceptance. "I learned their language, read their books. When I was 16, I returned to my people. Was it difficult going back?" "Yes." Maka's gaze met hers. "I was caught between worlds, too Apache for the white man, too white thinking for some of my people. But I found my place eventually." "And now?" Sarah asked. "What is your place now?" "Now I am free," he said simply. "I answer to no one but myself and the land, and to a promise made to a dying man," Sarah added softly. Maka nodded. "That too." As autumn deepened, bringing colder nights and golden days, the dynamic between them shifted gradually. Sarah found herself watching for Maka's approach, not merely for the practical help he provided, but for his presence itself. James had taken to running to meet him, proudly displaying new skills or discoveries. Even baby Emma seemed to recognize him, cooing and reaching out pudgy hands when he entered the cabin. Sarah noticed how gently the warrior's calloused fingers clasped the infant's tiny ones, his stern face softening momentarily. The first snow came earlier than expected, a sudden heavy blanket that transformed the landscape overnight. Sarah woke to find James already outside, trying to follow deer tracks as Maka had taught him. She called him in for breakfast, watching his rosy-cheeked excitement. "Do you think Maka will come today?" James asked, spooning food into his mouth. "I want to show him I can read the snow signs." "I don't know, sweetheart. The weather might keep him away." But by midday, Maka appeared, his horse pushing through drifts, his dark figure stark against the white landscape. James rushed to meet him, chattering about the tracks he'd found. "Good," Maka nodded approvingly. "But did you see the fox that crossed behind your cabin before dawn?" James's face fell. "No. Next time," Maka assured him. "Your eyes are getting sharper each day." As Sarah watched them together, her son looking up with admiration, Maka patiently explaining, something tightened in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but also a more complicated emotion she wasn't ready to examine. That evening, when James had fallen asleep exhausted from playing in the snow, Sarah and Maka sat by the fire as had become their custom. "The winter will be hard," Maka said. "I may not always be able to come as regularly." Sarah nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. "We'll manage. You've taught James so much already. He is still very young to shoulder a man's responsibilities." "Yes," Sarah agreed, looking into the flames. "But he's all I have." She hesitated. "All we have." Maka studied her face in the firelight. "You are stronger than you know, Sarah Miller. You will survive this winter, and many more." It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it in his voice stirred something unexpected within her. "And you?" she asked. "Will you survive the winter? Alone in the mountains?" "I have survived many winters," he replied, "but I admit this one feels different." Their eyes met across the fire, and neither looked away. In that moment of silent acknowledgement, something changed between them, fragile and undefined, but undeniably present. Outside, the snow continued to fall, isolating the small cabin in its silent embrace. Inside, beside the warmth of the fire, two people from different worlds found themselves drawn together by circumstance, bound by a promise, and perhaps by something more. The winter deepened, transforming the landscape into a stark tableau of white and gray. January brought bitter cold that seeped through the cabin walls and froze water buckets overnight. Sarah worked constantly, chopping wood, melting snow for washing, preserving what food they had, and caring for her children. James continued to develop skills under Maka's tutelage, his small hands becoming increasingly capable at setting snares and identifying animal tracks. Maka's visits grew less predictable as heavy snowfalls made travel treacherous, but he never stayed away for more than a week. Each time he appeared on the horizon, Sarah felt a rush of relief that she told herself was merely practical. His help meant survival. One particularly harsh morning, Sarah awoke to find Emma feverish and fussy, her small face flushed, her breathing labored. "James," Sarah called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Fetch more wood for the fire. We need to keep it hot." By midday, Emma's condition had worsened. She refused to nurse, her tiny body radiating heat, her cries growing weaker. Sarah bathed her with cool water, whispering desperate prayers as she worked. "Will Emma die like Papa?" James asked, his young face solemn with worry. Sarah pulled him close. "No, sweetheart. She's very sick, but we're going to make her better." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. As dusk approached, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, Sarah heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats. Maka appeared, his horse pushing through snowdrifts, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "The baby is sick," Sarah said by way of greeting, her voice tight with fear. Maka dismounted quickly, following Sarah into the cabin. He examined Emma carefully, his expression grave. "Lung fever," he diagnosed. "Many children have fallen ill in the settlements." He reached for his saddlebag. "I brought medicines thinking they might be needed." Sarah watched as Maka mixed herbs with hot water, creating a pungent-smelling paste. "Place this on her chest," he instructed, and she must breathe the steam from this tea. Through the night, they worked together. Maka boiled more medicinal herbs, filling the cabin with aromatic steam, while Sarah held Emma, coaxing her to take tiny sips of the healing tea. James fell asleep on his pallet, exhausted from worry and the task of keeping the fire stoked. In the quiet hours before dawn, with Emma finally sleeping more peacefully in her cradle, Sarah found herself sitting beside Maka at the table. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from fatigue. "I was so afraid." "She is strong like her mother," Maka replied. "But the danger is not past. The next day will tell." Sarah nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. The stress of the day, combined with weeks of grief and struggle, broke through her careful composure. Tears slid down her cheeks. Without speaking, Maka placed his hand over hers on the table, a gesture so simple yet so profound that Sarah's breath caught. His palm was calloused but warm, his touch gentle. "You are not alone in this," he said quietly. Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. In the lantern light, his eyes held compassion and something deeper that made her heart quicken. "When Thomas died," she said hesitantly, "I thought everything solid in my world had crumbled. I couldn't see a path forward." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. "I never expected to find help from an Apache?" Maka finished, a hint of wryness in his tone. "From anyone," Sarah corrected. "I expected to face it all alone." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Emma stirred, breaking the spell. Sarah withdrew her hand, moving to check on her daughter. By morning, Emma's fever had broken. She nursed hungrily, color returning to her cheeks. The crisis had passed. "You saved her life," Sarah told Maka as he prepared to leave. The storm had cleared, revealing a crystalline day of blinding whiteness. "The plants saved her. I merely know which ones to use." His modesty did not diminish the gratitude Sarah felt. James tugged at Maka's buckskin jacket. "Will you teach me about the healing plants too?" "Yes," Maka promised. "When spring comes and they begin to grow again." "When will that be?" James persisted. Maka knelt to the boy's level. "The earth is sleeping now, gathering strength beneath the snow. When it awakens, we will see the first green shoots." He pointed to the distant mountains. "The signs are there for those who know how to read them." After Maka departed, Sarah watched James practicing his knots by the fire, Emma sleeping peacefully in her cradle. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something like hope taking root within her. Fragile but persistent, like the plants Maka had described waiting beneath the snow. February brought relentless storms that isolated the cabin for days at a time. During one such blizzard, with wind howling like banshees around the eaves, Sarah was startled by a pounding at the door. She opened it to find Maka, half frozen, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "I was caught in the storm," he explained as she helped him inside. His clothes were stiff with ice, his face raw from the wind. "You could have died out there," Sarah exclaimed, helping him remove his frozen outer garments. "I have sheltered in worse," he said, but accepted the blanket she wrapped around his shoulders. James ran to fetch more wood for the fire while Sarah prepared hot coffee. As Maka's body thawed, he revealed the purpose of his dangerous journey. "Soldiers have been patrolling closer to these foothills," he told her quietly, when James was occupied with his toys. "They're looking for renegade Apaches who refuse the reservation." Sarah's heart sank. "Looking for you." Maka nodded. "I may need to move deeper into the mountains for a time." "But the winter," Sarah began, "is less dangerous than a cavalry patrol," Maka finished firmly. The storm raged for 2 more days, making travel impossible. Maka slept near the hearth, while Sarah and the children occupied the cabin's small bedroom. Despite the cramped quarters, there was a comforting domesticity to their forced cohabitation. James delighted in having his teacher constantly available, while Sarah found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of adult conversation after months of isolation. On the evening before the storm finally broke, as James slept and Emma dozed in her cradle, Sarah and Maka sat before the fire, their voices low. "What will you do when spring comes?" Maka asked. "This land is difficult to farm alone." "I've been thinking about that," Sarah admitted. "Perhaps we should leave, find a town where I could work." Maka's expression grew troubled. "Towns can be unkind places for a woman alone." I'm stronger now than I was, Sarah said. Thanks to you. There is another possibility, Maka said cautiously. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. My people had a tradition before the reservations. When a woman lost her husband, sometimes his brother would step forward to provide for her and the children. Sarah looked at him questioningly. Thomas had no brothers. No, Maka agreed, but he had someone who promised to watch over his family. The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah's heartbeat quickened as she realized what Maka was suggesting. You mean, I would stay, Maka said simply. Help you work this land, teach James. Watch Emma grow. He met her gaze steadily. If that is what you want. Sarah's mind raced. Such an arrangement would be unthinkable in the world she had come from. A white settler's widow and an Apache warrior. The mere suggestion would scandalize any proper community. Yet here, miles from the nearest settlement, facing the harsh realities of frontier life alone with 2 young children. The soldiers, she said. You said they're looking for you. They will eventually lose interest or assume I have gone to another territory. Maka's voice was calm, practical, and this place is remote enough to avoid casual visitors. People would talk if they knew. Do you care what people who do not help you think? Maka countered gently. Sarah looked around the small cabin that had been her home for 3 years. She thought of the future she had imagined with Thomas, now forever altered. She thought of James and Emma, of their needs beyond mere survival, and she thought of Maka, his quiet strength, his patience, his wisdom, the man who had kept a promise to a stranger and saved her family from certain death. I need time to think, she said finally. Maka nodded. The decision must be yours, freely made. He rose to add wood to the fire. I will leave when the storm breaks, give you space to consider. As Sarah lay awake that night, listening to the wind gradually diminishing outside, she realized that the prospect of Maka's extended absence brought not relief, but a hollow feeling of loss. Somehow, without her noticing, his presence had become essential to her sense of security, and perhaps to something deeper that she was only beginning to recognize. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of deep drifts and ice-laden trees gleaming in the winter sunshine. Maka prepared to depart, checking his horse's tack with methodical care. James clung to him. Please don't go. I must, for a little while, Maka explained, ruffling the boy's hair. But I will return before the last snow melts. Sarah stood on the porch, Emma bundled against her chest, watching as Maka mounted his horse. Be careful, she called. Maka looked back at her, his gaze intense. Consider what I have said. Whatever you decide, I will honor it. As his figure grew smaller against the vast whiteness, Sarah felt the weight of the choice before her, a choice that would shape not just her future, but the futures of her children and of the man who had become so unexpectedly central to their lives. March arrived with warming winds that began to erode the snowdrifts around the cabin. The promise of spring whispered through the valley as ice melted from streams and the first green shoots appeared in protected hollows. Sarah watched these changes with a mixture of hope and anxiety, knowing that Maka would return, as he had promised, and that she would need to give him an answer. During the weeks of his absence, she had contemplated her situation from every angle. The practical benefits of Maka's proposal were undeniable. His skills would ensure their survival, and James would continue to learn from a man whose knowledge of this land was unmatched. Emma would grow up with a protective presence in her life. But Sarah's considerations went beyond practicality. In Maka's absence, she had been forced to acknowledge how deeply he had come to matter to her, not just as their savior and provider, but as a man whose quiet strength and integrity had earned her profound respect, and perhaps something more. One mild afternoon, as Sarah hung washing on the line with Emma playing on a blanket nearby, she spotted a distant rider. Her heart leapt with recognition. Maka's distinctive silhouette was unmistakable even at a distance. James came running from where he'd been checking his snares. "Maka's back!" he shouted, already sprinting toward the approaching figure. Sarah watched as Maka dismounted to greet the boy, lifting him easily onto his shoulders. The sight of them together, James chattering excitedly, Maka listening with his characteristic patience, cemented something in her heart. By the time they reached the cabin, Sarah had composed herself, though her pulse still quickened as Maka approached. "You look well," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance. "The children too." "We are," Sarah confirmed. "Thanks to your teachings, James caught 3 rabbits last week." Pride flickered across Maka's face as he glanced at the boy. "Soon you will be teaching me, young one." James beamed. "Did you see any soldiers?" A shadow passed over Maka's features. "Yes. A patrol passed through the valley to the east, but they have moved on toward Fort Grant." Sarah felt a chill despite the mild day. "Are you still in danger?" "Less than before," Maka replied. "There are rumors of peace talks. Some say the government grows tired of chasing shadows through these mountains." That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Maka sat outside beneath a sky blazing with stars. The night was cool but not cold, the scent of pine and emerging spring growth perfuming the air. "I have thought about what you proposed," Sarah began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maka remained silent, waiting. "Before I give you my answer, I need to understand what this would mean for you," she continued. "You value your freedom above all else. Staying here, taking responsibility for us, wouldn't that be another kind of reservation?" Maka considered her question carefully. "There is a difference," he said finally. "The reservation is a prison imposed by others. This would be a choice freely made." He looked toward the distant mountains, silver in the moonlight. "I have lived alone for many seasons. I have come to recognize that freedom without purpose becomes its own kind of emptiness." "And you would find purpose with us?" Sarah asked softly. "I already have." His gaze returned to her face, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "When I found your husband, I expected only to deliver his message and continue on my way. I did not expect to find—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I did not expect to find a place where I was needed, where I belonged." The rawness of his admission touched something deep within Sarah. "When Thomas died, I thought I would never feel whole again," she confessed. "I was so angry, at him for leaving, at God for taking him, at myself for not being strong enough to survive alone." Her voice grew steadier. "But these past months have taught me that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it means accepting help. Sometimes it means opening your heart to unexpected possibilities." Maka reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. "What is your answer, Sarah Miller?" She turned her palm upward, her fingers intertwining with his. "Yes," she said simply. "Stay with us. Not just as a provider or a teacher, but as—" She hesitated, then finished with quiet certainty, "as part of our family." The relief and joy that transformed Maka's normally stoic features made Sarah's heart swell. He raised their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture of profound respect and affection. "There will be difficulties," he cautioned, though his eyes remained bright. "Not everyone will understand or accept." "Let them talk," Sarah said with newfound conviction. "We know the truth of who we are and what we mean to each other. That's what matters." Over the following weeks, as spring firmly established its hold on the land, they settled into a new rhythm. Maka constructed a lean-to beside the cabin where he slept, respecting the propriety that Sarah still valued. During daylight hours, they worked together, clearing fields for planting, repairing winter damage to the cabin, hunting and gathering the first spring foods. James blossomed under Maka's consistent guidance, his confidence growing as he mastered new skills. Even little Emma seemed to sense the change, reaching happily for Maka whenever he entered the cabin. One evening in early April, as the sunset painted the western sky in spectacular oranges and pinks, Sarah found Maka carving something from a piece of ash wood. "What are you making?" she asked, sitting beside him on the porch step. "A gift," he replied, his hands moving deftly. "For you." When he finished, he presented her with a delicately carved eagle feather pendant suspended on a leather cord. "Among my people, the eagle represents courage and wisdom," he explained as she admired the intricate work. "It also symbolizes the connection between earth and sky, between different worlds." Sarah understood the deeper meaning. "Like us." Maka nodded. "I cannot offer you a gold ring as your Thomas did. But I can promise you this. As long as I draw breath, you and the children will never face this world alone. Sarah let him place the pendant around her neck, the carved feather resting against her heart. "I don't need gold," she said. "This means more." In that moment, with the setting sun gilding the land around them, Sarah recognized how profoundly her life had transformed. The grief that had once threatened to consume her hadn't disappeared. Thomas would always occupy a cherished place in her heart and in her children's memories. But alongside that grief, something new had taken root. A resilient, hard-won happiness born of unexpected connection. As summer approached, bringing with it lush growth and the promise of abundance, the small homestead flourished under their combined efforts. Makka's knowledge of the land complemented Sarah's domestic skills, creating a harmony neither had expected to find. Word eventually reached them